The morning sun painted the small mountain chapel in golden light, but inside everything had gone terribly wrong. Lisa stood at the altar in her white wedding dress, watching the last few guests shuffle out the wooden doors. Her hands shook as she held her bouquet of mountain wildflowers, the same flowers she had picked yesterday with such joy and excitement. Just 2 hours ago, this place had been filled with laughter and celebration. Her wedding day was supposed to be perfect. She had dreamed about it since she was a little girl, planning every detail down to the last ribbon on her dress. The chapel was small but beautiful, nestled between tall pine trees with a view of snow-capped mountains in the distance. It was exactly what she had always wanted, but now the chapel felt cold and empty. The white ribbon decorations still hung from the wooden pews, but they looked sad somehow, like forgotten promises. The minister had left after trying his best to comfort her. Even her cousin Amy, who had driven up from Denver to be her bridesmaid, had packed up and headed home with an apologetic hug and promises to call later. Lisa looked down at the crumpled note in her free hand. She had read it so many times that the words were burned into her memory. Her fiancé David had written it in his messy handwriting on hotel stationery. The words were simple but brutal. "I can't do this. I'm sorry. I took the money we saved. Don't try to find me, that was it." 3 years of dating, 8 months of engagement, and thousands of dollars in wedding savings, all dismissed in 3 short sentences. She had found the note on the groom's dressing room table, right next to his unused boutonniere. Her maid of honor, Rebecca, was nowhere to be found either. Later, Amy had gently told her that someone saw David and Rebecca loading suitcases into his car at the hotel that morning. The betrayal cut deeper than she could have imagined. It wasn't just David leaving her at the altar, though that was painful enough. It was Rebecca, too. Rebecca had been her best friend since college. They had been roommates, shopping partners, and each other's biggest supporters through breakups, job changes, and family drama. Rebecca was the one who had encouraged Lisa to say yes when David proposed. She was the one who helped pick out the wedding dress and plan the perfect mountain ceremony. Now Lisa understood why Rebecca had been so quiet during the rehearsal dinner last night. She had seemed nervous and kept checking her phone. Lisa had thought she was just worried about her maid of honor speech. She never imagined that Rebecca was planning to run away with the groom. The financial reality was almost as crushing as the emotional pain. David had access to their joint savings account, which they had built up over 2 years to pay for the wedding and honeymoon. That money was supposed to last them for their week in Hawaii and help them start their new life together. Without it, Lisa couldn't even afford a hotel room for the night, let alone the bus ticket back to her hometown in Kansas. Her phone battery had died hours ago, and she realized she didn't even have a car charger. David had driven them up to the mountains in his truck, and now she was stranded 3 hours away from the nearest city. Her old car had broken down last month, and they had decided not to fix it since they were planning to move in together after the honeymoon. As the afternoon turned to evening, Lisa found herself sitting on the chapel steps, still wearing her wedding dress. The temperature was dropping as the sun disappeared behind the mountains. She had never been in the Rockies before, and she hadn't realized how cold it could get even in late spring. The dress that had made her feel like a princess that morning now felt thin and useless against the mountain chill. She had been crying on and off all day, but now the tears seemed to have dried up. She felt empty and numb, like she was watching someone else's life fall apart. A few cars had passed by on the mountain road, but none of them stopped. Why would they? She probably looked like some crazy woman in a wedding dress sitting alone in the middle of nowhere. Hunger was starting to set in. She hadn't eaten anything since a piece of toast that morning, too nervous and excited about the wedding to have much appetite. Now her stomach was growling, but she had no money and nowhere to go. The nearest town was 5 miles down a winding mountain road, and she couldn't make that walk in her wedding shoes and dress. As darkness settled over the mountains, Lisa began to feel real fear creeping in alongside the sadness and anger. The temperature was dropping fast, and she could see her breath forming small clouds in the air. She had no coat, no money, no phone, and no way to contact anyone for help. The chapel was locked up tight, and even if she could get inside, there was no heat or food there. She thought about her parents back in Kansas. They would be worried sick when they didn't hear from her after the ceremony. They had wanted to come to the wedding, but money was tight since her father's accident at the factory last year. She had told them not to worry about it, that she and David would visit them after the honeymoon to celebrate. Now she wished desperately that they were here. The mountain silence was different from anything she had ever experienced. Back home, there was always some kind of noise. Cars passing by, neighbors talking, dogs barking. Here, the quiet was so complete it almost hurt her ears. The only sounds were the wind moving through the pine trees and the occasional hoot of an owl somewhere in the darkness. Lisa pulled her knees up to her chest and wrapped her arms around them, trying to conserve warmth. The wedding dress bunched up around her, and she could feel the delicate fabric starting to tear on the rough wooden steps. This dress had cost her 3 months of savings from her job at the coffee shop. She had felt so beautiful in it this morning, twirling in front of the mirror in the bridal suite at the hotel. Now it just felt like an expensive costume for the worst day of her life. She thought about all the dreams she had wrapped up in this dress and this day. She and David had talked about buying a little house with a garden where she could grow vegetables and maybe raise some chickens. They had planned to have children in a few years when they were more settled. She had imagined hosting family dinners and holiday celebrations, creating the warm, stable home she had always wanted. All of those dreams felt foolish now. How could she have been so blind? Looking back, she could see signs that David wasn't ready for marriage. He had been working late more and more often, claiming his construction job was demanding overtime. He had seemed distracted during their wedding planning meetings, always checking his phone or suggesting they postpone decisions until later. And Rebecca, how long had she been planning this betrayal? Lisa remembered all the times Rebecca had asked detailed questions about David, his work schedule, his interests. She had thought Rebecca was just being a good friend, trying to understand the man Lisa was going to marry. Now she realized Rebecca had been gathering information for her own purposes. The cold was becoming serious now. Lisa's teeth were chattering and she could no longer feel her fingers or toes. She knew she needed to find shelter or get help, but she felt paralyzed by the overwhelming nature of her situation. Where could she go? What could she do? She had never felt so alone and helpless in her entire life. She tried to pray, something she hadn't done much since childhood, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she found herself making promises to herself. If she somehow got through this night, she would never again trust someone so completely with her heart and her future. She would never again put herself in a position where one person could destroy her entire life with a single decision. As she sat there in the darkness, wrapped in her ruined wedding dress and facing an uncertain future, Lisa had no idea that her life was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. She couldn't know that sometimes the worst moments in life are actually doorways to something better, and that her real love story was just about to begin. The inside of Jake's cabin was even more magical than Lisa had imagined from the outside. Warm air enveloped her as soon as she stepped through the door, carrying the scent of pine wood and something delicious cooking on the stove. The main room was cozy but spacious, with a stone fireplace crackling cheerfully on one wall and comfortable furniture arranged around it. Handmade wooden shelves lined the walls filled with books, tools, and various mountain trinkets. Wow, Lisa breathed, looking around in wonder. You built this yourself? Jake nodded, pulling off his cap and running a hand through his dark hair. Took me about 2 years working on it whenever I had free time. Had to learn a lot of skills I never thought I'd need, like plumbing and electrical work. YouTube University taught me most of it. Lisa could see the pride in his work everywhere she looked. The log walls were perfectly fitted. The stone fireplace was beautifully crafted, and every detail showed the care of someone who had built this place to last. It was the kind of home she had always dreamed of. Warm and welcoming and full of character. Are you hungry? Jake asked. I've got a pot of stew on the stove, and there's plenty for 2 people. Lisa realized she was starving. She hadn't eaten anything substantial since the night before, too nervous about the wedding to have much appetite. That sounds wonderful if you don't mind sharing. Of course I don't mind. Make yourself comfortable by the fire and I'll get you a bowl. Lisa settled into a big armchair near the fireplace, pulling Jake's coat tighter around her shoulders. The warmth was making her sleepy, and for the first time all day she felt safe. She watched Jake move around the small kitchen area, which was separated from the main room by a breakfast bar made from a beautiful piece of live-edge wood. He was graceful for such a big man, moving with the efficiency of someone who was used to taking care of himself. He ladled stew into 2 bowls, cut thick slices from a loaf of homemade bread, and poured glasses of water from a pitcher. The simple domesticity of it made Lisa's heart ache a little. This was what she had imagined her life with David would be like. Quiet evenings at home, sharing meals and comfortable conversation. "Here you go," Jake said, handing her a bowl and settling into the chair across from her. "It's nothing fancy, just beef and vegetables, but it's hot and filling." Lisa took a bite and closed her eyes in appreciation. It was the best stew she had ever tasted, rich and hearty with tender chunks of meat and perfectly cooked vegetables. "This is incredible. Where did you learn to cook like this?" Jake laughed. "Trial and error, mostly. When you live this far from town, you learn to make do with what you have. I grow a lot of my own vegetables in the summer, and I trade with neighbors for meat and other supplies. Old Pete taught me how to make bread, and Mrs. Chen down the mountain showed me her stew recipe." As they ate, Jake told her more about his life in the mountains. He woke up at sunrise every day, spent his mornings cutting and splitting firewood, and his afternoons on various projects around the property. He had a workshop in the basement where he made furniture and other wooden items that he sometimes sold in town. In the evenings he read, worked on puzzles, or played guitar. "It sounds so peaceful," Lisa said wistfully. "I can't imagine what it would be like to live somewhere this quiet." "It took some getting used to," Jake admitted. "The first few months, the silence actually kept me awake at night. In Denver, there was always noise, traffic, sirens, neighbors. Up here, the loudest thing is usually the wind in the trees or an owl calling to its mate." After dinner, Jake showed her to the guest room, which was small but comfortable with a single bed covered in a colorful quilt, a small dresser, and a window that looked out into the forest. He brought her some clean clothes, a pair of his flannel pajamas and thick socks that would be huge on her but warm and soft. "The bathroom is right across the hall," he said. "There are clean towels on the shelf, and help yourself to anything you need. I'll be up for a while if you need anything, but try to get some rest. You've had a hell of a day." Lisa changed out of her wedding dress and into Jake's pajamas, which were indeed enormous on her small frame. She had to roll up the sleeves and pant legs several times, but they were the most comfortable clothes she had ever worn. As she brushed her teeth with a spare toothbrush Jake had provided, she caught sight of herself in the bathroom mirror. Her hair was a mess, her face was puffy from crying, and she was swimming in oversized pajamas, but somehow she looked better than she had in months. There was something about this place, this peaceful mountain sanctuary, that was already working its magic on her stressed and wounded spirit. The bed was incredibly comfortable, and Lisa fell asleep almost immediately to the sound of wind in the pine trees and the distant hooting of an owl. She slept more deeply than she had in weeks, without the anxiety dreams that had been plaguing her as her wedding day approached. She woke up to the smell of coffee and bacon cooking, and bright sunlight streaming through the guest room window. For a moment she couldn't remember where she was, and then the events of the previous day came flooding back. But instead of the crushing despair she expected to feel, she found herself curious about what this new day would bring. Jake was in the kitchen when she emerged, fully dressed and moving around with practiced efficiency. He had already been up for hours, she could tell, and had probably done more work than most people did in a full day. "Good morning," he said with a smile. "Sleep okay?" "Better than I have in weeks," Lisa admitted. "Thank you again for letting me stay. I'll get out of your hair as soon as I can figure out what to do next." Jake paused in his cooking and looked at her seriously. "Where exactly are you planning to go? Do you have family you can call?" Lisa sat down at the breakfast bar and accepted the cup of coffee he poured for her. It was strong and perfect, exactly what she needed. "My parents live in Kansas, but they don't have money for a plane ticket or anything like that. My dad's been out of work since his accident, and they're barely getting by as it is." "What about friends?" Lisa thought about that for a moment. Most of her friends were really David's friends, people from his work or his college buddies. The few girlfriends she had were either married with small children and busy with their own lives, or they lived far away. She realized with a sinking feeling that she had let David become the center of her social world, and without him, she didn't have much of a support network. "Not really," she said quietly. "I guess I've been pretty isolated without realizing it." Jake nodded thoughtfully as he flipped bacon in the pan. "What kind of work do you do?" "I worked at a coffee shop back home, but I quit last month to focus on wedding planning and getting ready to move in with David after the honeymoon." She laughed bitterly. "I gave up my apartment, my job, everything. I was so sure about our future together." "What did you do before the coffee shop?" "I have a degree in elementary education. but I never found a full-time teaching position. The coffee shop was supposed to be temporary while I looked for something better, but temporary turned into 3 years. Jake was quiet for a while, focusing on cooking breakfast. Lisa sipped her coffee and looked out the window at the forest, marveling at how different everything looked in the daylight. The trees were tall and majestic, and she could see a small vegetable garden behind the cabin that was already showing green shoots of spring growth. "I have a proposition for you," Jake said finally, setting a plate of eggs, bacon, and toast in front of her. "I could use some help around here, especially with the growing season coming up. The garden needs a lot of work, and I've been putting off some projects because I just don't have enough hands. If you want to stay for a while, I could pay you something for helping out and you'd have a place to live while you figure out your next move." Lisa looked at him in surprise. "You barely know me. Why would you offer something like that?" Jake sat down across from her with his own plate. "Because sometimes people need a chance to catch their breath and figure things out. And because I could genuinely use the help. I'm not trying to rescue you or fix your life or anything like that. I'm just offering a fair trade. Work for room and board and a little spending money." Lisa thought about it as she ate her breakfast. She had no money, no job, and nowhere else to go. But more than that, there was something about this place that called to her. The peace and simplicity of it, the connection to nature, the sense of building something real and lasting with your own hands. "What kind of help do you need?" she asked. Jake's face lit up with enthusiasm. "Well, the garden needs to be expanded and planted. I want to put in a bigger vegetable plot and maybe add some fruit trees. There's firewood to stack and split, customers to deliver to, and I've been wanting to build a greenhouse for starting seedlings. Plus, I get a fair amount of carpentry work from folks in town, and having an extra pair of hands would make those jobs go a lot faster." "I don't know anything about gardening or carpentry," Lisa warned him. "I didn't either when I first moved up here, but I learned and so can you. The important thing is being willing to work hard and pay attention. Everything else can be taught." Lisa looked around the cabin again, imagining herself as part of this peaceful, productive life. It was so different from anything she had ever experienced, but it felt right in a way she couldn't. 3 weeks into her stay at Jake's cabin, Lisa could hardly recognize the woman she had been on that terrible night at the chapel. Her hands, once soft from office work and city living, now bore the calluses of honest labor. Her skin had taken on a healthy glow from working outdoors every day, and her body felt stronger than it ever had before. She woke up each morning before sunrise, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. There was something magical about watching the sun come up over the mountains while sipping coffee on Jake's front porch, listening to the birds wake up and begin their daily songs. It was a peace she had never known existed. The work was harder than anything she had ever done, but it was also more satisfying. Jake had started her off with simple tasks like weeding the existing garden beds and organizing his tool shed. But as the days passed, he began teaching her more complex skills. She learned how to split kindling with a hatchet, how to start seedlings in makeshift greenhouses, and how to identify which plants were weeds and which were vegetables struggling to grow. "Feel the soil," Jake said one morning as they worked on expanding the garden. "It should be loose and crumbly like good chocolate cake. If it's too hard or too wet, the plants won't be happy." Lisa knelt down and ran the dark earth through her fingers, marveling at how different this was from her old life. A month ago, the closest she got to nature was walking past the potted plants outside the grocery store. Now she was learning to read the soil like a book, understanding what it needed to support life and growth. "I never realized how much there was to know about growing things," she said, watching Jake expertly prepare a row for planting bean seeds. "It seems like magic, putting a tiny seed in the ground and having it turn into food." Jake smiled, the kind of smile that started in his eyes before it reached his mouth. "It kind of is magic when you think about it. We're partnering with nature to create something beautiful and useful. That's not something you get sitting in an office building all day." As they worked side by side in the garden, Jake told her about his old life in Denver. He had been a project manager for a construction company, spending his days in meetings and dealing with paperwork instead of actually building anything. The money had been good, but he had felt empty and restless, like he was sleepwalking through his life. "I had everything that was supposed to make me happy," he said as they took a break in the shade of a big pine tree. "Nice apartment, new car, good salary. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was wasting my life, that I was meant to be doing something more meaningful." What made you finally decide to leave? Lisa asked, genuinely curious. She had never met anyone who had made such a drastic change in their life. Jake was quiet for a moment, pulling at the grass beside him. My dad died suddenly of a heart attack. He was only 58, worked in an office his whole life, always talking about the things he was going to do when he retired. He never got the chance to do any of them. Lisa could hear the sadness in his voice, even though it had been several years since his father's death. I'm sorry. That must have been devastating. It was, but it also woke me up. I realized I was following the exact same path, putting off the life I really wanted for some imaginary future that might never come. So I quit my job, sold everything I didn't absolutely need, and moved up here to the land my grandfather left me. Have you ever regretted it? Jake looked around at the mountains, the garden, the peaceful cabin they had been working so hard to improve. Not once. Some days are harder than others, especially in the winter when I'm snowed in for weeks at a time, but I've never once wished I was back in that office wearing a tie and pretending to care about quarterly reports. Lisa understood what he meant. Even after just a few weeks, she couldn't imagine going back to her old life. The coffee shop job that had once seemed like a temporary stepping stone now felt like a prison she had been too afraid to escape from. Here in the mountains, she was discovering parts of herself she never knew existed. The physical work was changing her in ways she hadn't expected. She was stronger, yes, but also more confident. When Jake showed her how to use a power saw to cut lumber for a new garden fence, she had been terrified at first. But under his patient guidance, she learned to handle the tools safely and effectively. By the end of the day, she had cut all the boards they needed, and the sense of accomplishment was better than any feeling she could remember. You're a natural at this, Jake said as they cleaned up the worksite. I think you missed your calling as a carpenter. Lisa laughed, but inside she glowed with pride. No one had ever told her she was a natural at anything before. David had always been quick to point out her mistakes and shortcomings, but slow to acknowledge her successes. Jake was the opposite. He celebrated every small victory and turned every mistake into a learning opportunity. In the evenings, after the work was done and they had shared dinner, they would sit by the fire and talk. Lisa found herself opening up to Jake in ways she had never opened up to anyone, telling him about her childhood, her dreams, her fears about the future. He was an excellent listener, asking thoughtful questions and offering insights without trying. To fix her problems for her, I keep thinking about what my life would have been like if David hadn't left me at the altar, she said one night as they watched. The fire burned down to glowing embers. We would be back from our honeymoon by now, probably fighting about whose turn it was to do the dishes in our tiny apartment. Jake poked at the fire with an iron rod, sending sparks dancing up the chimney. Do you miss him? Lisa thought about that seriously. I miss the idea of him, the future I thought we were going to have together. But the more time passes, the more I realize that future was never real anyway. I was in love with a fantasy, not with the actual person. What kind of fantasy? The whole thing. The white picket fence, the perfect house, the 2 kids and a dog. I thought if I could just get all the pieces in place, I would finally be happy. But I was trying to force David into a role he never wanted to play, and I was trying to be someone I'm not. Jake nodded thoughtfully. I know that feeling. I spent years trying to convince myself that I wanted the corporate life, because that's what success was supposed to look like. It took me way too long to figure out that success means different things to different people. What does success look like for you now? Jake gestured around the cabin, out toward the garden and the forest beyond. This, waking up every morning excited about the work I'm going to do. Being able to provide for myself with my own hands, having time to read, to think, to enjoy the changing seasons, being connected to something bigger than myself. Lisa felt a warm glow in her chest as she listened to him talk. She was beginning to understand what he meant. For the first time in her adult life, she felt truly useful, truly necessary. The garden needed her attention. The firewood needed to be stacked. The customers needed their deliveries. She was part of something important and meaningful. But it wasn't just the work that was changing her. It was Jake himself. She was falling in love with his quiet strength, his patient teaching, his deep respect for the natural world. She loved the way he could fix anything that broke. The way he knew the name of every bird that visited their feeders. The way he made her feel capable and valued. She was also falling in love with the way he looked at her. Not like David used to look at her, with a mixture of affection and mild annoyance, but like she was someone worth paying attention to. Jake noticed when she learned a new skill, when she had a good idea, when she was struggling with something difficult. He saw her in a way that made her feel like the best version of herself. One afternoon, as they worked together to build a fence around the expanded garden, Lisa realized that she was completely happy. Not hopeful about future happiness, not working toward eventual contentment, but actually genuinely happy in that exact moment. She was sweaty and dirty, her back ached from bending over fence posts, and she had never felt better in her life. "Jake," she said, looking up from the post hole she was digging. "Thank you. For what?" "For saving my life. Not just that night at the chapel, but every day since then. You've given me a chance to find out who I really am." Jake stopped hammering and looked at her seriously. "Lisa, you saved your own life. I just provided the space for you to do it." That night, as Lisa lay in her small bed listening to the wind and the trees, she realized that her old life felt like it had happened to someone else. The woman who had stood at that altar in her white dress, waiting for a man who would never come, seemed like a stranger now. The woman she was becoming was stronger, more independent, more connected to what really mattered in life. She was also, she admitted to herself in the darkness, falling deeply in love with Jake. Not the desperate, clingy kind of love she had felt for David, but something deeper and more solid. Jake made her want to be the best version of herself, not because he demanded it, but because his own example inspired her to reach higher. But she wasn't sure how he felt about her, and she was afraid to find out. What if this was all just kindness on his part? What if he saw her as a charity case, someone he was helping out of the goodness of his heart? The thought of ruining their friendship and working partnership by confessing feelings he didn't share was. The sound of an unfamiliar car engine broke the peaceful morning quiet as Lisa and Jake worked in the garden. They both looked up from the tomato plants they were staking, squinting toward the dirt road that led to the cabin. A shiny black sedan was making its way carefully up the rutted path, clearly not designed for mountain driving. Lisa's blood ran cold as she recognized the car. It was David's new sedan, the one he had bought just before their wedding with money from their joint account. The one he had probably used to drive away with Rebecca after abandoning Lisa at the altar. "Who is that?" Jake asked, noting the tension that had suddenly filled Lisa's entire body. "It's David," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the approaching car. "My ex-fiancé." Jake immediately moved closer to her, not touching but making his presence felt. "Do you want me to send him away?" Lisa shook her head, though she appreciated the offer. "No, I need to face this. I need to find out what he wants." The car pulled to a stop in front of the cabin, and David got out slowly, looking around at the mountain setting with obvious distaste. He was dressed in his usual outfit of pressed khakis and a polo shirt. Completely inappropriate for the wilderness, but typical of his refusal to adapt to any situation that wasn't exactly what he preferred. He looked the same as always. Average height, thinning brown hair, the slightly soft build of someone who spent all his time behind a desk or in front of a television. But seeing him now after weeks of living and working alongside Jake, Lisa was struck by how small he seemed. Not just physically, but in every way that mattered. "Lisa," David called out, his voice carrying that familiar tone of assumed authority that had once made her feel secure, but now just sounded irritating. "There you are. I've been looking everywhere for you." Lisa stood up slowly, brushing dirt from her work clothes. She was wearing old jeans, a flannel shirt, and sturdy boots, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She knew she looked nothing like the woman who had stood at the altar in her white dress, and she was glad. That woman had been trying to be someone she wasn't, trying to fit into David's narrow vision of what a wife should be. "Hello, David," she said calmly. "What are you doing here?" David's eyes flicked to Jake, who was standing quietly beside the garden fence, but clearly ready to intervene if necessary. David's expression showed a mixture of confusion and annoyance, as if he couldn't understand why Lisa would be with another man, or why that man looked so capable and confident. "I came to take you home," David said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "This whole thing has gone on long enough. Rebecca and I made a mistake, and I'm ready to work things out with you." Lisa stared at him in amazement. After everything he had put her through, after stealing her money and leaving her stranded with no way to get home, he actually expected her to just get in his car and come back to him as if nothing had happened. "Work things out," she repeated. "David, you left me at the altar. You took all our money and ran away with my best friend. What exactly is there to work out? David had the grace to look slightly embarrassed, but his tone remained defensive. Look, I know I handled things badly. I panicked, okay? The whole wedding thing was moving so fast and I wasn't ready for that level of commitment. But Rebecca helped me realize that you and I have something special, and I don't want to throw that away over one mistake. Rebecca helped you realize that? Lisa couldn't keep the disbelief out of her voice. Where is Rebecca now, David? David shifted uncomfortably. She went back to her ex-boyfriend in California. It turns out she was just using me to make him jealous, and it worked. They're engaged now. Lisa felt a bitter laugh bubble up in her throat. So Rebecca had used David the same way David had used her. And now that his backup plan had fallen through, he was back to claim his original choice. The arrogance of it was breathtaking. So let me get this straight, Lisa said, her voice getting stronger with each word. You left me at the altar for another woman. That woman dumped you for someone else, and now you want me to come running back because I'm your second choice? It's not like that, David protested, but his voice lacked conviction. You're not my second choice. I realize now that I never stopped loving you. This whole experience has taught me what's really important. Jake stepped forward slightly, and Lisa could feel his protective energy like a warm shield at her back. David noticed the movement and his expression hardened with something that might have been jealousy. Who is this guy anyway? David demanded. Lisa, are you living with some stranger you just met? Do you have any idea how dangerous that is?
His name is Jake, and he's not a stranger, Lisa said firmly.
He's the man who saved my life when you left me with no money, no car, and no way to get home. He's the man who spent the last month treating me with more respect and kindness than you showed me in 3 years. David's face flushed red with anger and embarrassment. Lisa, you're not thinking clearly. This guy has obviously taken advantage of you when you were vulnerable. You belong with me, in civilization, not living like some kind of mountain hermit. That was when Jake finally spoke, his voice calm but carrying an undertone of steel that made David take an involuntary step backward. I think Lisa is perfectly capable of deciding where she belongs and with whom. And I think you should watch how you talk to her. David puffed up like an angry rooster, trying to project a confidence he clearly didn't feel. This is between me and my fiancé. It's none of your business. Ex-fiancé? Lisa corrected sharply. And Jake has every right to speak. This is his property, and you're not welcome here. For the first time since David had arrived, Lisa felt completely sure of herself. Standing there in her work clothes with dirt under her fingernails and the mountain air filling her lungs, she knew with absolute certainty that she would never go back to her old life. David represented everything she had moved beyond. The need for approval, the willingness to make herself smaller to fit someone else's expectations, the belief that security was more important than happiness. Lisa, be reasonable, David tried again, his tone becoming wheedling. What kind of future can you have up here in the middle of nowhere? I'm offering you marriage, a house in a good neighborhood, stability. What's he offering you? A life of manual labor and isolation? Lisa looked around at the garden she had helped plant, the cabin that had become more of a home to her than anywhere she had ever lived, the mountains that had taught her what peace really felt like. Then she looked at Jake, whose brown eyes were full of quiet strength and unconditional support. He wasn't asking her to choose him. He was simply being there, letting her know that whatever she decided, he would respect it. He's offering me freedom, Lisa said quietly. Freedom to be myself, to discover what I'm capable of, to build something meaningful with my own hands. He's offering me partnership instead of ownership, respect instead of control. This is ridiculous, David snapped, his patience finally running out. You're throwing away your future for some romantic fantasy about country living. In a year, you'll be tired of this primitive lifestyle and begging to come back to the real world. The real world? Lisa felt her own anger rising for the first time. David, this is the real world. Growing your own food, building your own shelter, being connected to the land and the seasons. This is how human beings lived for thousands of years. Your idea of the real world is sitting in traffic for hours, every day to go to a job you hate so you can buy things you don't need to impress people you don't like. David stared at her as if she had grown a second head. I don't even know who you are anymore. I'm the person I always was underneath, Lisa said. I just finally have the space and freedom to let her out. David made one last desperate attempt. Lisa, I'm offering you everything you said you wanted. Marriage, security, a normal life. If you don't come with me now, that's it. I won't ask again. Lisa felt a moment of sadness, not for the loss of David, but for the time she had wasted trying to force their relationship into something it was never meant to be. I know you won't ask again, David, and I'm grateful for that. David's face went through a series of expressions: anger, hurt, disbelief, and finally a kind of cold resignation. Fine. When this mountain man fantasy falls apart and you're left with nothing, don't come crying to me. He turned and stalked back to his car, getting in and slamming the door harder than necessary. The sedan backed carefully down the dirt road, its low clearance scraping against rocks and ruts. Within a few minutes, the sound of the engine faded completely, leaving only the wind in the trees and the distant call of a hawk. Lisa stood perfectly still for a moment, processing what had just happened. She had confronted her past and chosen her future, and she felt lighter than air. When she turned to look at Jake, she found him watching her with an expression of quiet admiration. You okay? He asked gently. Better than okay, Lisa said, and she meant it. I'm free. Jake smiled, the kind of smile that lit up his entire face. So what do you want to do with your freedom? Lisa looked around at the garden, the cabin, the mountains, and the man who had given her the space to discover who she really was. I want to finish planting these tomatoes. I want to help you build that greenhouse you've been planning. The rumble of a diesel truck engine cut through the mountain silence like a warm knife through butter. Lisa's head snapped up from where she had been resting it on her knees, hope flickering in her chest for the first time in hours. Headlights swept across the chapel yard as an old blue pickup truck pulled into the gravel parking area, its engine coughing before settling into a steady idle. Lisa tried to stand up, but her legs had gone stiff from sitting in the cold for so long. She managed to get to her feet just as the truck door slammed shut, and she saw a tall figure walking toward her through the darkness. Her heart started beating faster, and she wasn't sure if it was from hope or fear. Out here in the middle of nowhere, she had no way of knowing if this stranger was someone who would help her or someone she needed to be afraid of. Hello? A deep voice called out. Everything okay over there? The voice sounded kind, with a slight roughness that suggested its owner spent a lot of time outdoors. As the man got closer, Lisa could make out more details in the light spilling from his truck's headlights. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing work boots, jeans, and a thick flannel shirt. A baseball cap covered dark hair, and he moved with the confident stride of someone comfortable in the wilderness. I'm fine, Lisa called back automatically, even though she clearly wasn't fine at all. It was the response she had been trained to give since childhood, the polite lie that kept people from having to get involved in her problems. The man stopped a few feet away from her, and she could see his face clearly now. He looked to be in his early 30s with kind brown eyes and a short beard. His expression showed concern as he took in her wedding dress, her shivering form, and the obvious signs that she had been crying. Ma'am, I don't mean to pry, but you don't look fine, he said gently. My name is Jake, and I deliver firewood to the chapel here every week. I've never seen anyone out here this late before, especially not someone in a wedding dress. Lisa wrapped her arms around herself tighter, suddenly aware of how she must look. Her carefully styled hair had come loose and was hanging in messy waves around her face. Her makeup was smeared from crying, and her dress was wrinkled and dirty from sitting on the chapel steps. There was supposed to be a wedding, she said quietly, but the groom didn't show up. Jake's expression darkened with understanding and sympathy. Ah, hell. I'm sorry. That's about the worst thing I can imagine happening to someone. His genuine concern was almost harder to bear than David's betrayal. This stranger, this man she had never met before, was showing her more kindness than the person who had promised to love her forever. Do you have somewhere to go? Jake asked. Family or friends who can come get you? Lisa shook her head, not trusting her voice to stay steady if she tried to explain her situation. Jake was quiet for a moment, studying her face in the dim light. She could see him thinking, weighing his options. Look, I know this might sound strange, but you can't stay out here tonight, he said finally. The temperature's supposed to drop below freezing, and you're not dressed for mountain weather. You could get seriously hurt or worse. I'll be okay, Lisa said again. But even as the words left her mouth, she knew they weren't true. She was already shivering so hard she could barely speak clearly, and the night was only going to get colder. Jake stepped closer, and she could see the genuine worry in his eyes. No, you won't be okay. And I can't in good conscience load up my truck and drive away knowing you're out here like this. My cabin isn't far from here, and you can warm up there while we figure out what to do next. I don't know you, Lisa said, taking a small step backward. She had already been betrayed by two people she trusted completely that day. The idea of going anywhere with a complete stranger, no matter how kind he seemed, sent alarm bells ringing in her head. You're right to be cautious, Jake said, holding up his hands to show he meant no harm. But look around. Do you see any other options? The nearest town is miles away, and there's no bus service up here. Even if you could walk that far in those shoes, everything would be closed by the time you got there. Lisa looked down at her white satin heels, which were completely impractical for walking anywhere, let alone hiking down a mountain road in the dark. Jake was right. She really didn't have any other options. I have a generator, a wood stove, and plenty of food, Jake continued. There's a guest room with a lock on the door, and I give you my word that you'll be safe. I just can't drive away and leave you here to freeze. Something in his voice convinced her. Maybe it was the obvious sincerity, or maybe it was the fact that he had mentioned the lock on the guest room door without her even asking about it. He seemed to understand exactly why she would be nervous about going anywhere with a man she had just met. Okay, she said quietly. But just for tonight. Jake nodded. Just for tonight. Let me get you a coat first, though. You're shaking like a leaf. He jogged back to his truck and returned with a thick winter jacket that smelled like pine trees and wood smoke. It was much too big for her, but it was warm and dry, and Lisa pulled it gratefully around her shoulders. Better? Jake asked. Much better. Thank you. As they walked toward the truck, Jake explained that he lived about 20 minutes up the mountain on a piece of land his grandfather had left him. He made his living cutting and selling firewood, doing some carpentry work, and helping out other mountain residents with various projects. He had moved up here permanently about 5 years ago after getting tired of city life. What city? Lisa asked as he held the passenger door open for her. Denver. I used to work in an office building wearing a suit and tie every day, sitting in meetings about meetings. He shook his head. It nearly drove me crazy. One day I just packed up everything that mattered and moved up here. Best decision I ever made. The truck's interior was clean but well used, with a thermos of coffee in the cup holder and work gloves on the dashboard. Jake started the engine and cranked up the heat, and Lisa felt herself beginning to relax for the first time all day as warm air flowed over her. As they drove up the winding mountain road, Jake kept up a steady stream of gentle conversation, pointing out landmarks and telling her about the wildlife in the area. Lisa got the sense that he was trying to keep her mind off her troubles, and she was grateful for his thoughtfulness. There's my closest neighbor, he said, pointing to a light in the distance. Old Pete. He's been up here for 40 years, knows everything about mountain living. And over there is where I saw a family of elk last week. The road got narrower and more winding as they climbed higher into the mountains. Lisa could see tall pine trees on both sides, their branches creating a canopy overhead that blocked out most of the starlight. It was beautiful in a wild, untamed way that was completely different from the flat farmland where she had grown up. Almost there, Jake said as they turned onto a dirt road that seemed to disappear into the forest. I know it probably seems like the middle of nowhere, but I promise you'll be safe. A few minutes later, they emerged into a small clearing where a log cabin sat nestled among the trees. It looked like something from a fairy tale, with warm yellow light glowing from the windows and smoke rising from a stone chimney. Solar panels gleamed on the roof and a neat stack of firewood was piled along one side of the building. Home sweet home, Jake said as he parked the truck. Lisa stared at the cabin in amazement. It was small but perfect, like something she might have dreamed about but never thought she would actually see. After the chaos and betrayal of the day, it looked like the most peaceful place on earth. Come on, Jake said gently. Let's get you inside where it's warm. As Lisa followed him up the wooden steps to the front door, she had no idea that she was walking into a completely new chapter of her life. Sometimes the worst day you can imagine is actually the first day of something beautiful. And sometimes the kindness of a stranger can change everything.